Good. All right. Okay, we're getting started. And hello, ACS SF Bay community, and welcome to our August 2022 SF Bay monthly chapter, our chapter monthly speaker event. And as you know, we meet the fourth Tuesday of the month. I'm Susan Hopp, a board member. And for anyone new to the American Cetacean Society, we began in 1967. We are the oldest nonprofit dedicated to the protection of whales, dolphins, porpoises, and their habitat. And we do this through really three ways: education, community engagement, and grants toward marine research. And we appreciate your donations in support of our mission. They do fund our grants and support our expenses around these monthly talks. So to all of you who do donate, a big thank you. We are recording this session, and we encourage you to put the questions in the Q&A. And after the presentation, I'll do my best to get to them. So tonight, we have a really exciting talk. It's called Monterey Bay, Bountiful and Biodiverse. And our tour guide is award-winning photographer and whale research, Jodi Frediani. Jodi's based in Santa Cruz, itself at the north end of Monterey Bay, but her photographic adventures have taken her around the world, where for 20 years she has been swimming with and photographing humpback whales on the Silver Bank in the Dominican Republic. And while Monterey Bay wildlife keeps her very busy, her photographic adventures have taken her to Africa, Alaska, Argentina, Antarctica, the Arctic, Brazil, Franz Josef Land, Norway, Siberia, Thailand, and Tonga. Her work has appeared in a number of national and international publications, including the BBC's Nature's Weirdest Events and Carl Safina's National Geographic blog, Ocean Views. In addition to photographing wildlife in its many forms and habitats, Jodi is engaged in whale research via several fluke ID projects, both here and abroad. And with co-authors Nancy Black and Fred Sharp, she published her first paper in 2020 entitled Post-Mortem Attractions: Humpback Whales Investigate the Carcass of a Killer Whale Depredated Gray Whale Calf. I think that's was killed by the orca, right, Jodi? Anyway, Jodi is currently collaborating on 2 additional papers about humpback whale bubble use, and recently returned from a 3-week boat-based humpback whale field research expedition in Southeast Alaska. So we'll be putting in the chat where you can check out her photography. And as Jodi prefaced this talk, she said, consider this presentation as a celebration of the biodiversity of this Serengeti of the sea in our own wondrous backyard. So thank you, Jodi, for being here. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Susan, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak to the San Francisco chapter again. It's been a while, but you always have a wonderful group of people, so I'm really looking forward to this evening, and I want to thank everyone else for joining. So let me see if I can actually share my screen. Did I succeed?
You sure did. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And can you see the strange Zoom things that I see in the middle of my slide? I hope not. No.
Okay.
You just see my slide.
Yes, just see.
Okay, great. That's, I guess the rest is for me to deal with. Okay, so as Susan said, we're gonna take a visit to Monterey Bay this evening, and I am really excited. I have lived here in the Santa Cruz Mountains for over 50 years, and it actually took me many years before I actually got out on the water and realized that we had whales here. So shame on me, but I would like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, why does this not, okay, there we go. I want to sort of dedicate this evening's talk to the 30th anniversary of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And the actual anniversary date is September 18th. So this is very excellent timing. And if you look at that image on the right there, that is shows the outlines of the sanctuary. And as you can see, it encompasses far more than Monterey Bay. So I believe it's the second largest marine sanctuary in the U.S. marine sanctuary system. And it runs from down near San Luis Obispo to north of San Francisco Bay. And then you can see there's a square area here. That's the Davidson Seamount, which is also a quite prolific area and was included. So to get started, we'll take a closer look. As Susan said, I live up in Santa Cruz, which is on the north side of the bay, and Monterey and Pacific Grove are down on the south side, and Moss Landing is there in the middle. And besides being a very large bay, what makes this one particularly unique is the Monterey Submarine Canyon, which, as you can see, runs smack down the middle. It's over a mile deep in the deepest part of the canyon, and then it runs north and it runs south and actually goes into Carmel Bay. And it's very important for the biodiversity that we see in this particular bay. Those little pink spots there are areas where a number of the photographs were taken, some over the canyon. You can see some near shore, but not so many over on the Santa Cruz side, because that's not where, one, I leave on boats out of Monterey, but also there's not as much activity there because of the bathymetry, the what's going on in the bay itself. So let's go back in time a little bit. And what we see is, I'll get this out of the way. When the native people were here, and this comes from a little book called The Ohlone Way, about the history in the San Francisco Monterey Bay area. What we heard that back then is that life in the ocean and in the unspoiled bays of San Francisco and Monterey was likewise plentiful beyond modern conception. There were mussels, clams, oysters, abalones, seabirds, and sea otters in profusion. There were also thousands of acres of salt and freshwater marshes, savannas, and grasslands. All the rivers spread out to form wide marshy valleys in the winter. And as we know, most of those marshes, freshwater marshes, have been drained over time. We still have Acorn Slough. We still have some marshes around San Francisco Bay. But then, does this not want to work? Then the white folks showed up. And in around 1740, a seafaring man named Bering, for whom the Bering Sea is named, shipwrecked in the Commander Islands, or out in the Aleutians. And he saw this great plethora of sea otters and began to hunt them. And in fact, I understand that Alaska was sort of populated by non-native folks because of the sea otters, because sea otter hunting became a very important thing. So the Russians started that activity. And then as they depleted the population up there, they moved south. And at that time, we had sea otters all the way down to Baja. And they got down, and they just kept hunting them out, because somehow we don't seem to understand moderation in the things that we do. And Monterey Bay lost all its sea otters. I mean, we were thought to be extirpated. But it wasn't sea otters alone. We had the herring trade, and we had Italian fishermen show up, and the Chinese and the Japanese. And as I'm sure most people know about Cannery Row, we had a huge herring fishery, sardine fishery that took place until we depleted the sardines. And the Chinese showed up, and some of the other fishermen didn't want them. There was like racism as well. They didn't want them fishing during the daytime. So the Chinese said, well, we've got lanterns, and the squid, which come into Monterey Bay to spawn, are attracted to the light. So the Chinese began fishing for the squid at night using their lanterns. And we still have a squid fishery today. We don't see the sardines in the bay very often anymore. Now we have anchovies, but we also had an abalone fishery. And the reason that abalone fishery was able to take hold is when the sea otters were abundant, the abalones would hide in the crevices of the rocks because the sea otters are capable of actually pulling these abalones loose from the rocks. And the abalones are smart enough to hide. Well, once the sea otters are gone, the abalones moved back out onto the rock faces, and it became easy for the fishermen to actually get them. Unfortunately, what happened then is that the adult abalone feed on a very coarse algae, and the larval form feed on a very fine algae. And once the adult abalone were removed in large numbers, the coarse algae took over. It squeezed out the fine algae, and the abalone population wasn't able to recover. So we've had problems with that as well. So we had 100 years. Well, before we get to that, we also had whale hunting, and Monterey Bay became known as the whale killing capital of California. And in the 1740s, we actually had, actually, no, it was later than that. It was like maybe almost 180 to 100 years after the sea otters were initially hunted. They opened up a shore-based whaling station in Davenport, and then maybe 50 years later, they opened up another shore-based station in Moss Landing. Hunting of whales, of course, was going on all up and down the Pacific coast. And the first whale that was actually captured and brought into the Moss Landing station was a sperm whale. And the stories are that when the winds blew from the Salinas Valley, the scent of that whale, and anybody who's ever been around a whale carcass knows that it's quite a powerful scent, was actually able to be smelled in the Santa Cruz. So we went from 100 years of resource exploitation, and we started to get smart and turn to resource protection. The first, there's an international fur trade treaty in 1911, which slowed down or halted the hunting of sea otters. But then in 1972, the California Coastal Commission was established, Marine Mammal Protection Act was implemented, and the National Marine Sanctuaries Act was also passed. In 1976, the California Coastal Act, it was connected to the Coastal Commission, was adopted, and Congressman Leon Panetta was elected, and he fought mightily against offshore oil drilling. And that became a big sort of cause and push behind the development of the creation of the sanctuary, because as people may remember, in 1969, there was a large oil spill off Santa Barbara, which just wreaked havoc down there. And there are continuing pushes to expand the oil drilling up towards the Central Coast and up to, offshore from Monterey Bay. So in 1988, Leon Panetta helped create authorization for NOAA to begin planning a marine sanctuary for Monterey Bay. And as it always takes time to do these things, in 1992, George Bush Sr. actually implemented a 10-year moratorium on offshore oil drilling and authorized implementation of the sanctuary with the largest boundary. And folks may remember that the Bush family is very invested in oil. So why would he do something like this? Well, he wanted to get reelected for a second term and had been told that this is a really important, these are important items to Californians, and he needed the California vote to win re-election. They didn't win re-election, but we at least got a moratorium on offshore drilling and a large boundary that you see for, not quite that same boundary, but the large boundary for the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. So what makes this area so special? And I did mention the canyon, but it's also a matter of wind. And the way, it's a complex system. Everything I'm going to touch on tonight is basically just on the surface of things, whether it's the number of species, whether it's all the people who were involved in creation of the sanctuary, and there were lots and lots, or even how this works. It's just to get you interested. So we have what's known as upwelling, which is that the surface winds, and here they blow in the spring from the northwest, and because of the rotation of the planet, those winds push the warm surface water offshore. And then the cold nutrient-rich water, which is in this case particularly deep and particularly cold, comes up out of the canyon and replaces the warm water at the surface. And now you have these nutrients, the surface where you have sunlight, So you get the creation of blooms of phytoplankton that leads to zooplankton blooms. And then you have the whole system is based on that. So this is a photograph of krill. And I actually just took this over the side of a boat back before the anchovies came into the bay en masse. And the krill are a really important food source for lots of species in the bay. These guys are like little crustaceans. They look like shrimp. They're maybe 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch long at most. And as you can see here, their escape behavior is very limited because they're very little. And what you're looking at on the right there is the tip of the rostrum of the upper jaw of a humpback whale. Its mouth is wide open over on the left. You can just barely see the tip of the lower jaw starting to break through the surface, and this whale is about to engulf a whole mouthful, a huge mouthful of plankton, and the rest are doing their best to flee as well as they can. Here's another angle of humpback whales feeding. There's 3 together here, and if you look at the whale on the right, you see this sort of hazy pinkish fuzz spilling out. That's plankton. That's the krill. And the other 2 whales are lunge feeding on the side, which is pretty much all they need to do. They don't have to expend nearly as much energy to catch the krill as they do the fish, because the krill can't escape very well. This is a gray whale, and gray whales don't live in Monterey Bay. They migrate past. They do most of their feeding up in around the Bering Sea, up in Alaska. And then they migrate south to the breeding grounds and on the lagoons of Baja, but they're opportunistic feeders. And while they generally feed on benthic crustaceans, so down on the bottom, and they root around in the mud, in the sand, here is a whale taking advantage of the krill at the surface and doing some skim feeding. Blue whales, largest animals to have ever lived on the planet, also feed on krill. In fact, they feed almost exclusively on krill. So this very large animal, they can grow 80 to 100 feet in length, although their pec fins are small by comparison to the humpbacks, are feeding on these thousands, or I should say millions, of these little tiny crustaceans. Just to show you the other end of the blue whale, is they don't always fluke up when they dive, but it's quite a spectacle to see, and it's rare that we get waters quite this calm in Monterey Bay. Fin whales will also feed on krill, although they will feed on fish as well. And this one was photographed from the cliffs in Big Sur. I was down there looking for gray whales, and someone I was with noticed another whale just a little ways offshore, and lo and behold, it was this beautiful fin whale. You can see its whole body. They're known as the greyhounds of the sea. As you can tell, they're quite svelte and very fast, and can be easily recognized by the asymmetric white right lower jaw and then the white chevron behind the eyes. So I understand a lot of them congregate out by the Davidson Seamount, and we do them from time to time inside the bay. And we also have some birds that feed on krill, and of course the fish feed on krill. This is a red-necked phalarope. Believe that the brightly colored one is the female, the other is probably the male, and they will feed on the surface. They may swim around in little circles, paddling with their feet to stir up the krill and what other little things are there for them to feed on. So Steve Palumbi, the director of the Stanford University Hopkins Marine Station, has said this. He said, plankton blooms. The plankton feeding fish like anchovies feed and grow hugely, and this sparks the whole ecosystem to thrive. Essentially, we get serial dining of the plankton and the anchovies, then the bigger fish, and then the seals, the whales, all the way up the food chain. And we get to see some of that. So anchovies. And back in around 2013 to 2016, we had this anomaly of very, very warm water off the coast of California, actually all the way up to Alaska, known as the blob. And at that time, we had millions of anchovies come into the bay, even more humpbacks than we'd seen before, more sea lions. And this was photographed just looking down into the water off the Capitola Wharf. So it was quite extraordinary. And the anchovies have stayed around. Nobody who had been around the bay for 25 years prior to that had seen anything like it. There's stories about why. Nobody seems to know for sure, but here they were feeding quite a lot of species. This was an interesting humpback whale who carved out a niche for itself along the West Cliff Drive in Santa Cruz. There's a small bay called, or it's not even a bay, it's called Mitchell's Cove. And this whale would swim east, then make a U-turn and swim west in relatively shallow water, not very far offshore, using its pec fins to herd the fish forward. And it would go towards the western edge of the cove where there's an underwater wall that supports a sewer outfall pipe that goes 3 miles offshore. And so the whale would use that wall to bunch up the anchovies and then use its pec fins to actually herd them into its open mouth and lunge on them. There's, 100 people would gather on there day after day to watch the spectacle. It's quite wonderful. But we also see surface lunge feeding humpback whales out on the bay when the fish are, or the krill are at the surface. In this particular image, there are 12 whales feeding together. That was back in the heyday, several years back, but we still see them fishing by themselves, feeding by themselves, or feeding in small groups. Here you get to see the ventral pleats on the underside of the jaw, which expand and take in huge volumes of water along with the fish. And as the whale closes its mouth, the baleen traps the fish inside and the water escapes. That's a pretty extraordinary way to get your dinner. And you'll see here, this was actually in 2015. Pelicans. In Santa Cruz, one feeding and quite the spectacle. Thousands of pelicans.
Jodi, we can't quite hear that. And there's some echoing.
Some other background noise there. And while we don't have that many anchovies in the bay now, or that many pelicans, we still have quite a lot. So not all the pelicans were doing that plunge diving. There were so many anchovies close to shore that some of them just sat on the water and did duck diving, just put their pouches in and came up with anchovies. And if you look closely, you'll see one that's about to escape out of the upper part of the pouch of this pelican, and I'm sure it thinks it's saved itself, and yet that gull is probably going to take it out once it hits the water. So sea lions will also eat anchovies, and here's a pod, not a pod, but here's a bait ball inside the Monterey Harbor, and you can see how difficult it is, though, for the sea lion to actually grab the fish, because they coalesce, and as soon as a lion moves in, the waters part, and the fish do a very good job of staying with their colleagues there to protect themselves, and it's quite difficult. But this gives us an idea of why the sea lions actually like to feed along with the humpbacks. And I'll play this. There is no audio with it because I shot this with a drone. Otherwise, the audio, you would be listening to the drone propellers. But when the sea lions feed with the humpbacks, and in this case, the anchovies were deeper in the water column, as the humpbacks lunge sideways through the water down there, they disrupt that bait ball and they disorient the fish, and they may stun some of them, which makes it so much easier for these hundreds of sea lions to actually grab off the individual fish. So this is a kind of feeding that we will often see now in the bay, where the sea lions are out there joining up with the humpback whales to feed on the anchovies. Just to give us a view of some of the species that also feed, Is a better view of the sea lions on the left. There's a large bull and some smaller males on the jetty out of Monterey Harbor. On the right is a stellar sea lion, and we don't see many of them down here. They mostly have haulouts and breed up in Alaska and down as far south as the Oregon coast, but I don't think we have breeding colonies here, but we do see them from time to time mixed in with the sea lions, the California sea lions, or out on the buoys with the sea lions as well. We have harbor seals that's taken over by the Hopkins Marine Station, and they're quite shy. So I was up on the road with a telephoto lens, but you can see that harbor seal on top is not quite sure what to make of me. Of course, the ones on the bottom are oblivious, as that pup is nursing and mom looks like she's pretty zoned out there. Sometimes we will see fur seals, and this is a fur seal pup. And we have northern fur seals and Guadalupe fur seals. I'm not any good at telling them apart, but the typical way of identifying them is in a jug handle posture, which this one is not, where the pectoral flipper is wrapped around the rear flipper in forming what looks like a jug handle. But you can also see the long ears that they have. And we also have in the bay and a breeding ground and pupping ground up off of near Half Moon Bay on Nuevo is the elephant seals, the northern elephant seals. And I don't think that they do much feeding on the anchovies, because when they come to this area, they're generally coming out on shore. The females are giving birth to their pups. The males are mating with the females, or they come back and they're molting, but they tend to go offshore and do deep dives to do their feeding. But I just wanted to include them because they're part of our marine mammals here. We also have harbor porpoise, and I know that you have them in San Francisco Bay, and that I guess it's the Golden Gate project. I have the name quite right, but Bill Keener and our dear departed friend Izzy Shapaniak are studying the harbor porpoise there. We have them in Monterey Bay. They're fairly shy. They don't really hang around by the boats, and they're quick, so it's hard to see them sometimes. And we also have Dawes porpoise. And ordinarily, when we see them, it's like the upper right-hand photo where they send up this great rooster tail of spray, and it becomes difficult to actually see the porpoise in there. Sometimes they slow down and you get to see their lovely coloration, and the fact that for as fast as they have quite a bulky body, and less frequently they will actually bow right off our boats. The bottlenose dolphin, and it may be in fact that these specific dolphins might be some that you are also seen and studied by the same Golden Gate Project folks in San Francisco Bay. And it looks like there's some scarring there from probably their pod mates, and they will feed on the fish in the bay. We often see them by shore. We have the Pacific white-sided dolphins, who are very athletic. We may see pods of thousands of them from time to time, and I think they hold the Pacific white-sided dolphin Olympics, because sometimes you see them just spinning, flying out of the water, doing 180-degree turns, or a little carousel like they're doing here. We also have northern right whale dolphins, and they are quite beautiful. They look nothing like the other dolphins in that they have narrow heads, pointy beaks. They don't have a dorsal fin, and they're incredibly fast and speedy, but they will bow ride, which these are doing here, or they often join up with the Pacific white-sided dolphins, and you see mixed pods out there. And when they fly through the air, it's pretty hard to photograph them because they're out and in the water in a blink of an eye. And then we have common dolphins. They showed up, I think, in mass the first time when the waters were warm while the blob was offshore, but they have stuck around, or I should say, they come back into the bay from time to time. They've found that it's a good place to feed. And again, they're in quite large pods, and we'll often see them porpoising out of the water. So it's quite fun on a whale watch trip. And then, of course, there are the largest dolphins, and these are this is a transient killer whale. This is a particular whale named known as CA-138. And I got a call that morning from Nancy Black, who had a boat of passengers out. This is over just north of Moss Landing. Nancy said, I'm taking the passengers back and I'm going to take the boat back out. If you want to come, get on down here. So I didn't waste a moment and I flew down to Monterey, got on the boat. We found the killer whales again, and they were hunting, and she was there with her 2 juveniles and then an orphan male named Fatfin, who a lot of people have seen, and he would hang out with her from time to time. And they were hunting either a porpoise or a dolphin. So at this moment, she launched out doing this massive tail throw, which I then realized was stunning this dolphin. And then she popped up out of the water head first, batting this dolphin in the air. And if you look closely, you can see tooth marks there. So she had this common dolphin in her mouth. She could have bitten right through it, but she didn't. What she did instead was stun it with her tail and then stun it as she tossed it out of the water, and very quickly it somersaulted back into the water. Her 2 offspring came over quickly and they made short work of killing and then feeding on this poor dolphin. And there's CA-138 coming to watch. So it was basically an exercise where they got to watch and observe and participate in the hunt. They got to watch mom actually stun the dolphin, and then they had the chance to move in and kill the stunned dolphin. So it's quite wonderful to have the opportunity to see these killer whales teach their offspring how to feed. I will say that almost any time we get to see the surface action like this, it's some sort of a teaching situation where the killer whales are practicing their moves, or they're teaching the younger ones in the pod to do the hunt properly and do the kill. And in this case, this is either a juvenile male elephant seal or a female, and this particular pod of killer whales are taking turns tossing the elephant seal through the air, and then another one would come in and toss it again. So they're not, it's not like they're playing with their food. They're actually teaching one another and practicing their skills so they can maintain their little family units. The same thing here with this sea lion, where it took a long time, it took, I want to say 45 minutes, an hour for them to actually make the kill, because each of the family members was getting an opportunity to dive on the sea lion, to practice their moves. The youngest ones are watching, and while it can be difficult sometimes, we all have to make a living, and all living species kill something to eat, whether it's plants or animals. And these transients are mammal eaters by par excellence. This next slide might be difficult for some, but again, it's not that the last one wasn't, but it's a killer whale working on a gray whale calf. And because that's a very difficult hunting situation, and there are some families that are more adept at it, Emma and her family in particular. And this is hard because the mother of the gray whale calf is there, and she is doing her best to protect the calf. But I decided to put this slide in because it's important to recognize that, one species is there, the mother is working tirelessly to protect her offspring, and the other species is working tirelessly to feed her offspring. And many know that when killer whales take down gray whale calves, and they do that as the mothers are migrating back north to the feeding grounds up north, that they may only eat just the tongue and the lower jaw. If there are a lot of killer whales coming together, they may consume the whole carcass, but otherwise you have a lot of carcass left over. And it's not wasteful, it's a way of sharing in the ecosystem, so that here you've got black-footed albatross who are feeding on the carcass, you've got gulls who come in who are feeding on the blubber on the carcass, and you may get sharks coming in sooner or later. You can get the carcass actually sinks to the bottom of the ocean, or the bottom of the bay, or even down to the bottom of the, and you have a completely different ecosystem there, which includes bone-eating Osidex worms. It may include octopus and other species that come in to partake of this gift of food that has made it down to their level. And the transient killer whales don't just, they were named that, and I know I've had people complain that don't like that term. They think it's a judgment, and it's not a judgment so much as a statement of fact. And it came from calling them killers of whales. And we will see lots of humpback whales in the bay who have orca rakes or killer whale rakes on their flukes. So we know that they were attacked when they were young, but they survived. And this whale obviously went through a much more severe attack and is a survivor. Those attacks don't tend to happen in Monterey Bay because the calves are fairly large by the time they get up here. But this must have happened somewhere near the calving ground down south in Baja or in Mexico, or somewhere on the migration route. So we've seen krill, we've seen anchovies. Here's another prey species. These are what are known as the market squid, and what the Chinese fishermen were feeding with their lanterns. And today we've got big squid boats out there that have light boats with them, and they also, I say feed, fishing on them. They fish up these market squid, and most of the catch is exported, and most of the export goes to China. So in addition to the market squid and the deeper waters, we have larger squid. And this is one of our captains at Monterey Bay Whale Watch, who's since moved up to Canada with his wife and family. He squid that was, or portions of a giant squid that were just floating on the surface, possibly fed on by a Russo's dolphin, and then left. The rest of it was left. And you can see there on the right the hooks on the tentacles of this squid. And that's important because the Russo's dolphin, which we'll introduce here, who feed on these large squid, have sort of scarification, the scars on their backs, and they come from two things. They come from their other pod mates and part of social interactions, and they come from the hooks on the tentacles of the squid when they feed on them. We have here, just to show you a little more of the Russo's, as a young calf, and we know it's quite young, perhaps maybe 6 weeks old, because of that gold coloration. And you can see where the fetal folds were when it was in utero. As they grow, those marks, those disappear, and the coloration changes. We also have beaked whales in the bay, and they are seen less frequently, although there have been 2 sightings this past week of Baird's beaked whales. I wasn't out there, but my friends were. And they tend to be spotted over the deep reaches of the canyon, maybe heading down towards the Carmel Bay. And they will feed in the deep waters. They feed on squid, and they have long dive times. So if you see them once, you're quite lucky, as they may be down for 20 minutes to an hour or longer. We also have Cuvier's beaked whales. I've only seen them once myself. This is a mother and a calf. And I know at the time I was on the Blackfin, which is a large wheelhouse. I was in the wheelhouse. Captain John saw them. He said, "Cuvier's." And we grabbed our cameras, and a new intern nonchalantly walked to the door, and we said, "Run," because they don't stay at the surface very long. We managed to get out, get photographs, and then they dove, and we waited for another half hour and did not see them again. And another boat had come and stuck around, didn't see them either. So even less frequently seen in the bay are sperm whales. And I don't know that a family unit has ever been seen, but solitary males, maybe once every 4 years, are seen in the bay. And this particular whale, the same day that we viewed it, there was a recording of the clicks of the sperm whale on the hydrophone array that the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute has down on the Mars platform, just off the edge of the deep canyon. So that's a great resource. Anybody who wants to hear what's going on in the bay, they have live feed. You can look it up under Mbari hydrophone or Soundscape Listening Room. And this is another prey species. It's not found in the bay that often because they're mostly offshore, but they are blown by taken by the currents and blown by the wind. It's known as a by the wind sailor or a valella, and they're among my favorites. What here is a solitary Velella on flat calm water with its reflection below. It has this blue platform, and then it has sort of a, I want to say like a paper thin, but they call it a chitinous sail, and then tubes that hold air to help it stay afloat. And it does have tentacles, which are not so visible in this photograph. But if we look here, this is a cluster of Velellas. We had, I want to say maybe 2017, we had a huge bloom end up in the bay, end up all on the west coast of North America, and they would wash up on shore. And these were in a bucket on the boat. Had pulled them up to show to the passengers, and I was completely fascinated and couldn't take my camera away. The largest one here would fit in the palm of my hand or in the palm of your hand. And the golden color you see there is actually an algae that has a symbiotic relationship with the Velella. The littlest ones there you see look like those have spikes on them. Those are actually the tentacles that hang down below them and help gather food for the Velella. They are drifted around the ocean. Who feeds on the Velella? Well, a lot of different species, including the mola or the ocean sunfish. I think it's quite appropriate that Velella are eaten by mola. And here you can see one zeroing in with its large eyes and its open jaw. Now that mouth tends to stay open. I want to say all the time, but I've realized that when after they feed on the Velella, they actually spit out a spurt of water that came in with it. So they have to be able to close it to do that. They don't have teeth, but they have a cartilaginous like hooks on the inside. Help. They ordinarily eat jellies, because there are jellies more often in the bay. And that helps keep the jelly, the little gelatinous creature, from slipping out. And here you can get a good chance to see the tentacles on that little sailor there. We also have jellies. I said that the molas eat the jellies. This is a nettle jelly. It's photographed in the harbor. And here we have a bloom of nettle jellies, which happens from time to time. I saw on somebody's Facebook post the other day that there are quite a number of them off of Moss Landing at the moment. And who tends to eat jellies? Well, leatherback turtles. And I think this one is actually probably eating a lion's mane jelly. Could be a nettle jelly, but I think it might be a little too yellow for that. At any rate, these wonderful turtles breed on the beaches of Indonesia, and then they swim across the ocean to come here to feed on jellies. So imagine swimming across the Pacific Ocean after you've laid your eggs to come here and feed. And they feed in the bay. They'll feed along the coastline just north of the bay. I know that Scott Benson with NOAA studies them out of Moss Landing. It's always a treat to be able to see one of these turtles in the bay. Now, I call this a sea weasel. It's a southern sea otter. It's in the weasel family, and we talked about them earlier. This is a female. You can see from the little bit of scarring on her nose, because the species has a rather peculiar habit where the male would grab onto the female's nose in mating and often leave them scarred up. One of the problems that happened in terms of the health of the ecosystem when the otters are hunted out, and I should say, why is it and how that we have sea otters in the bay today? Well, there was a small population of about 30 otters down off the coast of Big Sur that were missed by the hunters. And that population has led to the pretty much thriving population of sea otters in Monterey Bay today. Unfortunately, the population hasn't spread back down to Southern California, even down to Baja, and researchers keep discussing what they may or may not be able to do to help that happen. But one of the difficulties when the otters are gone, besides the abalones, is that the purple sea urchins began to proliferate. And then that was exacerbated when there was a sea star unexplained die-off several years back, because they were also a predator. And you ended up with urchin barrens, where the sea otters will eat the holdfast of the kelp, of the bull kelp, and pretty soon you don't have kelp. And it became a big problem, not only here, but further up the coast. That kelp is an important nursery. It is important for having sort of holding or nurturing food supplies for some of the species. And it turns out that even when the otters go to feed on the urchins in these barrens, they no longer have the protection of the kelp forest, so that sharks may come in and attack them, thinking that there's something worth eating, and find out after they get a mouthful of fur and very little flesh and no blubber that it's not worth their time. But very often the otters will die from those shark bites anyways. These otters are they're omnivores. Well, I shouldn't say omnivores, but they're very opportunistic and they eat a lot of species. Here we have one who did find an abalone. We have some abalone for sure on the bay, cleaning the bowl for the last drop. This otter is feeding on fat innkeeper worms, 2 in the pouch there for dessert, and this one that's being eaten. And these fat worms are have that name because they burrow in the sand and they share their burrows with other species. And here is a female sea otter in the Monterey Harbor, and she has managed to bring herself up a lovely red octopus. Here is a mom and a pup, and mom was sharing bits of this clam with her pup, but apparently not enough, as the pup has come over and said, "Mom, you're still feeding and I'm still hungry. Give me some more." So it's not just the great variety of species in the bay that makes it an exciting place to visit, and it's the action that takes place there as well. Hunting of whales has been replaced now by whale watching. The number of whale watch boats keeps increasing every year, and you can see why. It's a real treat. I'm sure many of the people listening today have gone whale watching, if not all of you. And seeing whales breach is something that is unforgettable. They're really talented and can breach in many different ways. They don't do it to entertain us. They do it to communicate with one another. They may do it to remove parasites. And the study was done that showed that the young humpbacks who do lots of breaching are actually increasing the myoglobin in the muscle, which serves a similar function to hemoglobin in the blood and helps them retain oxygen, which enables them to swim longer and dive longer, swim longer on their migrations and dive longer when they're feeding. So it's always a treat to see breaching humpback whales. They're not the only ones to pop out of the water. This is a gray whale on the northward migration breaching. They don't seem to breach as much in the Monterey area as they do down in the calving grounds, but they do nonetheless. And if you're lucky, you get to see them. We also have the killer whales. This is a female named Louise who is beautiful porpoising for us. We have them sometimes actually doing full-on breaches. And as anybody knows who's been fortunate to see killer whales after they've had a good hunt, they like to celebrate and pop out of the water in all sorts of ways with their flukes, their sideways or spy hopping, whole 9 yards. This is one of our northern right whale dolphins. You can see it's very sleek, so sort of designed like the fin whale, no dorsal fin, the little pointy beak. They will usually just sort of fly out of the water, not breach that often, but sometimes we get to see that. Here's the ventral side, and this particular dolphin has an anomalous coloration. You see that sort of black, the black outline down the center here. It should be black all the way to that with just a white stripe down the middle, but in this case, it's has more white coloration. And then, of course, is a Risso's dolphin getting into the breaching act, and we have a calf who decided to breach with its mouth open. And if you look carefully, you can see 2 rows of teeth on the bottom jaw. And curiously, they don't have teeth on the upper jaw, but they don't need them. They just need, because they are feeding on squid. And I know Nancy Black did her master's thesis on Risso's, and a necropsy of a deceased animal found something like 13 different species of squid in its gut. So here's a little Risso's calf showing off its teeth to us. And we'll often see dolphins bow riding. These are the northern right whale dolphins again. There's actually 3 in this image. If you look at the one on the bottom, you can see the all black pec fin. The one in the middle has that extra white coloration, and I called it mittens. And then, of course, one on top, it looks more like a shadow. This is an incredible day when the waters are absolutely glassy and the colors are exquisite. This is natural. I didn't do anything to this image. And of course, while we're busy watching the dolphins, they're busy watching us. We get animals out there that play in the kelp, and we say, why do they do that? Maybe they're showing off. So here we have a male killer whale riding around with a big batch of kelp on its back. We've got a humpback whale wearing some on the rostrum, tip of the nose. You can see the blowholes over here just poking out of the water. I know that we often talk about the whales going to the spa, and it may be that it feels good to have this on their body. I know on the Silver Bank where I swim with humpbacks, the females in their in a courting pair may roll around in the sargasso weed, which is a bit prickly. And so there's a very tactile experience for them. And then we've got a Risso's dolphin playing with the kelp, and I think they may just actually play with it. They do like to play. And here we have 2 mother gray whales with their calves on their way up from the breeding calving grounds where they were born. And I don't think they're playing in the kelp so much as they're using it for cover. This is along the Big Sur coast. And by swimming close to shore in the shallower water, swimming through the kelp beds, they thwart the killer whales. That's not easy for the killer whales to drown a calf in shallow water. It's certainly not easy to try and navigate the kelp. And when the whales are close to shore like that, the shore break, the waves breaking on the shore, actually help muffle the blows and any of the motion so that it's harder for the killer whales to even detect them. And this, I can't explain this to you. This is a young killer whale who has decided to pick up a nettle jelly and carry it about on its lower jaw. I recently saw a photograph a friend took on the East Coast of a humpback whale doing something similar, except it had a jelly right on its rostrum. And some think that maybe a medicinal experience. These jellies will sting. Whether the whales feel it or not, I can't say, but this was a curious once in a lifetime sort of viewing. In addition to these other behaviors, we'll often see tail throws. When humpbacks do that, it can be a sign of irritation. One whale is telling another to back off, or I've seen it when a calf has strayed too far from mom on the breeding grounds and mom just fires off a tail throw and says, get yourself right back over here. But we have other species doing tail lobs. This is a Risso's dolphin. We have a killer whale doing a tail lob, and we will also get peck slapping. Here's a humpback whale. They have 15-foot long pectoral fins. This is a mother with her calf. They will communicate to one another, and again, they may be shaking off parasites. And of course, something that we all love to see are friendly whales. There's nothing quite like being seen by the species that you are out there watching. Whoops, let's move on again. All right. And then there's a little bit more behavior here. Today, I just saw posted on Facebook, a group of galloping or racing blue whales down in Southern California. It looked definitely like it was a competitive group to me. And here was a competitive group of blue whales in just off of the Carmel Bay, several years back. The blue whale on the right was the primary escort who's doing this powerful head lunge. The whale on the left with the cutoff fluke was the female that we had seen feeding earlier in the day. And then the challenger is in front. Was probably one of the most memorable sightings that I've had out there on the bay. And particularly so because we don't know where blue whales mate, and we don't know where they calve. So it was pretty exciting to actually see this activity. And here we have a pair of common dolphins actually mating in the wake of our boat. And out on Ano Nuevo Island, we are not on the island, but out on Ano Nuevo, the reserve there, we have a couple of young males who are testing their moves on one another, learning the call of each other, which they recognize as they get older. Very few of the males actually ever become harem masters, but they all have to practice their skills to see if they can get that so that they can mate with the females along the way. And what is all that this behavior about? It's to produce the next generation. Here is a female elephant seal giving birth to her pup. We were quite fortunate that she chose to do so near a viewing area and do it facing in the right direction. But imagine you've been in utero for a few months now, and lo and behold, you pop out and the next thing is you have a face full of sand. But I guess you have to get used to that since a good part of your life is spent on the sand or out in the ocean. And here's the same pup after a little while. It's kind of dried off and is trying to understand what its new life is like, no longer in fluid. Will be on shore for a couple of months until mom takes off. The calf will, this pup will have grown by leaps and bounds by then, and then will have to make its way out into the water and learn to hunt on its own. We also have leopard sharks. We used to have lots of them. There used to be great numbers of them in Alcorn Slough, but they were hunted. They do not bother people. They feed on clams and fish and on crustaceans. I saw these off the Santa Cruz shore, looking down from the cliffs of New Brighton, near New Brighton Beach. And then we have white sharks. We've always had white sharks in the area, and we hear infrequently, but from time to time, maybe a surfer has been attacked. The shark perhaps thought it was a seal or sea lion in the wetsuit. But back when the blob was stationed off the coast here and the waters warmed a bit inside the bay, the white sharks found that the area just to the north of the cement ship was made for a great nursery. It's now affectionately known as Shark Park. And my friend and colleague Caitlin Taylor and I rented a skiff out of the Capitola Wharf, and we went out to see if we could find some white sharks ourselves, and we found this juvenile. And just to show a few more, I can't possibly, we'd be here for a very long time if I even had the photographs to show of all the species that inhabit the bay. But this is a purple striped jelly. We see those from time to time. They're quite large and they're really beautiful. We have a comb jelly on the left. And these are in buckets or in trays. A Spanish shawl nudibranch was found by a naturalist and allowed me to photograph it. We have an opalescent nudibranch. On this one, they're so cute, and yet these things are ferocious and they can fight with one another, and then the winner goes and eats the loser. So best not to be a losing nudibranch. And then we just show what are sometimes known as squat lobsters or pelagic red crabs, and they generally like the warmer waters in Southern California. But when the blob brought us warm water up here, it brought a huge influx of these crabs. The places they were washed up on the shore, you see the gulls feeding on them, and they were quite spectacular to actually see. And with that, I will give a big thank you to Monterey Bay Whale Watch for allowing me to be on their boats for the last 12 years. And for anyone interested in seeing more of my images, is my website, jodifrediani.com. And anyone interested in knowing more about Monterey Bay, Caitlin and I have put together, actually Caitlin is the one who has come up with a new website for us. That's wonderful. It's still in construction, but most of it's there. Our storytelling project, Wild Monterey Bay, where we interviewed 40 people about their most memorable wildlife encounters in the Bay. And you can read about the people themselves and how they ended up here and what their background is. And then you can read their stories and see photographs of the species that they talk about. And we'll take questions. And thank you for being so attentive.
That was fantastic, Jodi. I mean, some of those photos, it made me, one of the first questions that I'll just pose. I mean, you've been doing this for obviously many years, and you know, you don't spend all your time at Monterey Bay, but do you pretty much go out and almost any day that you will see something pretty amazing, or you know, there's certain months of the year that are best? They're just such wondrous photos.
Thank you. It's a good question, and I will say that Monterey Bay is quite extraordinary in that there is action year round. I know I just saw somebody on the East Coast is like, this is the end, you know, the next few days are the end of the whale watching season. Monterey Bay, we have a whale watch season year round. It's not always the same species. The humpbacks are here from late spring to early fall. We may still have some, if the food is good, who stick around into November, and we may even see a few throughout the winter. The gray whales go on their south migration, say December and January, and then they come back, and the moms come back with their calves April and May. The killer whales show up when the gray whales come back. So that's a good time if you want to see killer whales if you want to see predation events. But they just had killer whales today, and I had a workshop on the boat. I think it was last Sunday, or maybe it was a Sunday. No, this was just a Sunday. It was the Sunday before, and we had killer whales, and we had 5 killer whales, the friendly pod. We followed them down to Carmel Bay, and they were here the day before. So it's hard to say. Dolphins are there. There are some years that are like 2013 to 2016 was absolutely extraordinary. But any day can be a good day, and it's you know, it's not SeaWorld, so there are no guarantees. For a long time, I was able to go out, say 3 days a week. And I know it's hard sometimes because this is a collection of, you know, many of my best images taken over an extended period of time. On the other hand, it's a great place to go whale watching. And if you pay attention, you know, even, you know, Moss Landing, there are creatures in the harbor there. You might see sea otters. You're going to see some sea lions. Monterey Bay, right now there are some ridiculous number of sea lions, 100 sea lions at the head of the wharf. I mean, they've never been there before. They've got to put up caution tape along the rock wall there because I don't know if it's to keep the sea lions from coming out, but it's certainly to keep the people from being not too bright and taking their children down and taking selfies and letting their dogs go. But there's always something to see if you keep your eyes open.
Good. And along those lines, one specific question we have from Murdy McGraw is specific to Rizzo dolphins. And what's the best time of year to see Rizzo dolphins?
That's a good question. And I should know the answers to all questions, but I don't. Rizzos can be around at any time. I know that I just saw some beautiful photographs taken by someone, a naturalist out of Moss Landing, a photographer out of Moss Landing, just the other day. The squid season, I'm thinking, is earlier in the year, but the rissos are there then. And it's the kind of thing that you can get lucky if you go out one time, but if you can possibly go more often, your odds of seeing them are greater. I didn't include in here photographs of Casper, who is our probably albino or leucistic Risso's dolphin. He's all white, but his family is out there, and I know, well, I guess it was like a week ago Friday I was out, and we had a wonderful nursery pod of Risso's dolphins. So I guess August is a good time.
Okay, Bertie, make your reservations. Okay, good. All right, Clara asks, what are the causes of the current algae bloom in San Francisco Bay? Might you know about that? And what is it beneficial to the food chain? What impact to the food chain, if you have any information on that?
Well, I'm not up to speed on what's happening in San Francisco Bay. I know that sometimes algal blooms are a result of human activity, such as sewage spills or too many nutrients coming off of the ag fields. And I can't say exactly because I don't know what's going on there. Some of them are natural, some of them not so much. I mean, the red tide can be a natural occurrence, but sometimes it's exacerbated by extra nutrients coming off of certainly down here in Monterey Bay, coming off of the ag fields. I have to get someone else to answer the rest of that question.
We'll keep that question and see what we can do with one of our naturalists. So, okay. Let's see. Can you say, this one is from Sherry. Can you say a little more about humpback breaching and the increase of myoglobin? Is the increase a result of exercising the major muscle groups? Does this apply to gray whales? And where can I find more information about this?
That's a good question. There's only one paper that I am aware of. And what I would do would be to go to Google Scholar and put in humpback whale myoglobin, or possibly email me. And I think I can find a copy of the paper, but it was done by a woman researcher, and her conclusion was that this activity, the breaching activity, and probably even tail lobbing and stuff like that, helps to increase the myoglobin. And I'm afraid I don't know a lot more than that, but I would imagine that if it's true in humpback whales, that it could certainly be true in other species as well.
Jodi, is that a recent study? Are you aware?
I want to say maybe the last 10 or 15 years. I'm really bad at time, but I mean, it's not an ancient study, but I've known about it for a while.
I think it's really interesting, because if you've ever seen of course, the breaching or the tail lobbing, and when you were talking about it, it kind of made me think of a parallel to us humans who exercise to get stronger.
Well, I mean, leaving the myoglobin part out, I can tell you this. I mean, I've spent at least 40 plus weeks out on the Silver Bank, which is the calving grounds of the North Atlantic humpback whale population. And we call it taking the calf for a walk, because very often in the afternoon, a mother and escort, and the calf will be slowly traveling, and the calf is repeatedly breaching, or the calf is repeatedly tail lobbing. And we see them do 50 in a row. And here's a calf, it's growing rapidly, it's feeding on mother's milk, it's putting on pounds every day, and it's down thousands of miles from where it has to go to eat solid food, once it's weaned from mom. And that's a long swim, so it has to become fit. And I'm certain it's just like us. You got to use the muscles to get them strong. Yeah.
Okay, then this is a comment, but I think you actually noted and anticipated it, but it's hard to see dolphins being tossed around among killer whales, for instance, as practice than, to kill them. But I thought you answered it very well, but that it's all part of the chain of life. But do you want to comment any more about how you take that in, and how is it difficult? I mean, I think it is, of course, difficult. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yes, I mean, I will say, first of all, I'm in a bit of an anomaly myself. What I mean by that is, I've done a lot of travel, and you go to Europe, and they have a different relationship to the foods that they eat than we do here, in that you can go to a market and you can see a carcass hanging, and you see the heads of chickens in the market, and you see, I remember being in Spain just a few years ago, and in northern Spain, and the display, or to bring people into the restaurant, was a chef cutting up an octopus in the window. And so that's something that we're not used to here. We get our meat in packages, in plastic. And I've always been fascinated about photographing that which is unseen. That's part of our lives, whether it's the birth of animals. I used to raise dairy goats. I would photograph the kids being born. I would help them, whether it's death. I mean, we'd have butchers come, and the butcher would shoot a pig that we had raised for meat. And I know that's very difficult for most people, but my feeling is, if we're going to eat meat, it's really valuable to understand what goes into that. I pass no judgment on whether people choose to eat meat or choose to be vegetarians, but it can be difficult. I mean, for me, I feel when I've got my camera there, I'm documenting what's going on. Does that mean that it's not difficult for me to watch killer whales taking down a gray whale calf? Of course it is. And I've seen some, which I won't actually talk about because it was so challenging, that it's hard sometimes, but it's a natural process. They're not wasting food. They're not doing some of the kinds of things that humans do. I mean, we kill for the most bizarre reasons. We kill because we're angry. And when those animals are killing, they're doing it because that's how they make a living. So to me, what humans do is far more disturbing than what I see the animals do.
Okay, another question. Where can we access your recent paper with Fred Sharp and Nancy Black?
Send me an email. And I don't know if that site is still visible. My email address is there, and maybe we can put it in the chat as well. So, and I'd be happy to send you a copy.
Yes, that'll be good. And actually, if you send it to us, we'd like to put it out there in our own newsletters and things. So that would be, that'd be good.
Okay. I would say it was published in Aquatic Mammal Journal, but they charge money.
Okay. Yeah, there might be copyright issues, but we can certainly refer people. I think a lot of people might be really interested in that.
Yeah.
So, okay. And Jodi's email and her two websites are still up on the screen. So, and lots of thank yous, how spectacular these photos are and artistic. Love your stories. Thank you for sharing. Okay, let's see. Yeah, and this is really amazing photography and information woven together. Yeah, the stories behind them are really great. So, and tying the specific food with the different species, and again that whole chain of amazing life. Okay, we have touched the gray whales in Baja. Do you know why some come close to the boats? What is there any benefit for them? That's
a great question. And I would say one of the papers I'm working on right now has to do with humpback whales that blow bubble rings. And I'm not talking about bubble nets. I'm talking about bubble rings like smoke rings. And if you Google dolphins and bubble rings, you can find dolphins that do this all over the place. It's crazy. Why do they do that? We think they're playing. Why do gray whales come over to the boats? The gray whales are the ones who initiated that in the lagoons. And when I see how the friendly, when we get mugged by humpbacks in the bay, and they come over, they're curious about us, they're interested in us. I think the same thing is true with the gray whales. And I I was asked once, I did a presentation in the Dominican Republic, and I did it in English because I don't speak enough Spanish, and a dear friend of mine translated it. And during Q&A, I was asked what benefit was there for the whales to have us swim with them, right? And the very important answer is it brings money into the Dominican economy, and it provides incentive for the Dominicans to protect their whales, and they have created a sanctuary out there. But I also said that I thought it provided entertainment for the calves. And my friend refused to translate that comment. And it was probably just as well, because we don't want to encourage people to hop in the water. I mean, the program I participate in is very, very well regulated. But if I think about it there, the ecosystem has changed dramatically because of overfishing and because of the die-off of coral. And I've spent time in Africa, and you see baby elephants at a water hole chasing birds. And some of we talked about the behavior, the surface behavior of calves as exercise, but they also do it. They're like all little kids. They've got just this excess energy, and they can't just go swim off from mom. They have to stick around. So what do? They pop out of the water. They play around. And so I was going to say, the baby elephants would do that. Well, there's nothing for the young calves to, there are no turtles around. There are not very many fish, things that would have been interesting to them. And I can't tell you why, I don't think anyone can tell you why the gray whales come over to be touched, but they certainly seem to enjoy it. They don't flinch. They stick around for it. And it's quite an extraordinary program that allows that. Humpbacks are not interested in tactile touch by us in that same way, and we're discouraged. Well, we're in the water, which is very different. It's a safety issue there. We don't reach out and touch them. But you're in a little panga in Baja, and the moms bring their calves over, and it's like I want to call it an intercultural exchange. It's a peace exchange.
Yeah.
It's like, if I mean, how can you go and hunt something that, has brought his babies over to you and said, here, touch my kids, kiss them on the head.
Yeah. Yeah. What about in your presentation, wasn't that a humpback whale in the video you showed that came up so close to the boat?
Yes. Yeah. That was this year. So that was, there were a pair of humpbacks. In fact, I think there might have even been 3, and they were doing some, friendly behavior with other boats before we got there. And they hung out with us for an hour and a half. Wow. Spy hopping. I mean, that was some of the closest approach I've ever seen. But I've seen them before on their sides and look up, and the eye is there just looking at the people. And I can't quite imagine. I mean, they know that there are these live beings on this very cumbersome, thing, this boat that's there. Yeah. And they want to learn more about us as well. Can't blame them.
Yeah. What a thrill that must have been. Okay. Here's a good question. What are the major changes you see on sea life in Monterey Bay that you might ascribe to climate change? Yeah.
Probably, and I see here, thank you, Elisa. It looks like she's posted the paper about myoglobin. And I would say probably the largest change is a change in species of the sharks. the shark nursery with the warmer waters. When the blob was there, we were seeing, the pelagic red crabs show up. I'm trying to remember, I don't know, maybe Lisa actually remembers, there were other species that seemed to show up. Well, the common dolphins came north. We hadn't had them in like that before. So I think a lot of what's happening, not just in the oceans, but all sorts of species are moving farther north as the temperatures warm. And I just was reading an article about up in Alaska in the Arctic where I'm really bad. I hadn't read it enough times, but tree species were like cypress or something like that, or I don't remember what they were, but conifers were popping up and expanding into areas of permafrost and low vegetation types, and concerned they're not everywhere, and they were trying to understand why exactly this is taking place, but it's creating a change. It's actually providing a feedback loop of increasing the temperatures in that area, because the trees are darker and they retain more heat, and you don't have this the complete snow cover over the lower Arctic vegetation.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and Marilyn comments that along what you're saying, when the blob showed up, we saw more bottlenose dolphins, which of course usually are, and I think our friends at Golden Gate Cetacean Research, now Marine Mammal Center Research, have been following that and charting that, and have some good research on that as well, that dolphins are moving north. Okay, how about what type of camera is the one you use the most? And I was very curious as well about your drone photography. So maybe you could touch on both of those.
Sure. For years, I was shooting until this year with a Canon 7D Mark III, Mark II, the Canon 7D Mark II. And it was a crop sensor, and it's a DSLR, and I used a 100 to 400 meter telephoto lens, and I loved it. And then my lens, I fell with it, got damaged. Canon repaired it, and then it seemed to be giving me some trouble last summer. And the camera manufacturers are moving towards mirrorless cameras. So I took the plunge, and I'm now using a Canon R5, which is a much more technical camera. I'm not a technical person. It's taken me a while to get my settings so that I can do most of what I want to do. There's certain things that it doesn't like to do. It wasn't designed for whales in the ocean. It's got some functions in it of tracking feature, eye tracking. So if you've got a bird in flight, you press, you've got it set up, you can get eye tracking and it can follow it. It's fantastic. You've got a mammal on land and you've got the eye, it's wonderful, but whales don't show their eyes. And this algorithm sees a black spot in the ocean and says, there it is. So it doesn't work for that. But when it works, the image quality is extraordinary. It's outstanding. Very large file sizes, which means you got to have larger backup hard drives. But it's, it's the way of the future. And if it's not a Canon, it's going to be a Sony or a Nikon. Everybody's going to mirrorless. So that's what I use. As far as the drone photography, I have a Phantom 4 Pro V2, which, I'm a member of several drone groups on Facebook, and everybody is going for the DJI Mavic drones, which are much smaller. They're lighter, they're easier to travel with, etc. I mean, the Phantom is a fairly large. The thing I like about Phantom is it's got legs on it. It's got a way to grab it on a boat, and it's very difficult to land a drone on a boat because it's going to slide around, unless it's absolutely flat. And you've got some way to do that. And Monterey Bay, it's never very flat. In Alaska, more so. But that's what I've begun doing. I've now got my Part 107 certification. I've just been having a hard time finding time since I got back from Alaska, but I did fly up there. We had a lot of bubble net feeding humpbacks. It was pretty exciting, but they kept moving around, so it was really difficult to get over when they were surfacing because you never knew where they were coming up again.
I'm assuming that was a wonderful photo of I assume it was from a drone with the gray whales and their calves going through the
No.
kelp forest. No?
No, that was actually from the cliffs of down in Big Sur.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
that was before I had a drone.
Okay.
And it's that's one of the difficult things, that a lot of the shoreline in the sanctuary is off limits for
For
drones.
drones, of course. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, it's 8:30 almost, and we've covered a lot of questions, and you've just filled our brains with and our, I'd say, hearts and minds with just really so much beauty and wonder. So thank you so much. And we'll be inviting you back.
But thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure. And I'm really glad to get all the questions. And if anybody has more questions, feel free to email me. Just be patient, because I've got a lot of projects going on right now, but I'll try and answer questions if I can. And yeah, thanks everyone for hanging in there with me. It was great.
Everyone is thanking you and saying how great it was. So it really was. All right. Well, thanks again. Have a great rest of night. And we'll see everybody for a really good talk in September. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bye.